Good morning, you all. I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover this morning. Folks may trickle in. It is a summer Sunday, so folks may trickle in, but I'm so excited about what's happening this morning, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm a bit sleepy this morning, and I'm me, and so I'm going to go ahead and read a lot of my remarks here because otherwise we're going to be in a hot mess. So welcome everybody to this summer series, Pathways of Discipleship. Whether you are a member, a visitor, or listening to a recording later, we're glad that you're here with us. As you know, we're exploring various pathways of discipleship as we remember the myriad of paths that faithful living leads us down. Recently, we have been hearing about the lives and legacies of the individuals now represented in our newest stained glass windows. And we're so glad to continue that exploration today by looking at the life and legacy of Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon. Before introducing our speaker for the morning, I'd like to open us with a word of prayer. So if you'd pray with me, please. Gracious God, source of all wisdom and truth, we come before you seeking space, sacred space within our hearts and minds to center ourselves in this moment of learning. Quiet the noise that distracts us, calm the anxieties that cloud our vision, and help us to settle into a posture of genuine curiosity and openness. May we approach this time not as those who have already arrived, but as believers eager to discover new pathways of understanding. We give you thanks for the gift of learning itself, for minds that can grow, hearts that can expand, and spirits that can be transformed by new insights. Today, we are especially grateful for the opportunity to learn about the remarkable life and ministry of Katie Geneva Cannon, whose legacy is now represented in our sanctuary through the beauty of stained glass. We thank you for her courage, her scholarship, her faithful witness, and the way she opened doors for others to walk through. Grant us clarity, O God, as we seek to understand womanist theology, this rich tradition that honors the experiences and wisdom of Black women, that speaks truth about oppression while proclaiming the fullness of human dignity. Help us grasp not just the concepts, but the heart behind them. Show us how this understanding can reshape the way we move through the world, how we see our neighbors, how we work for justice, how we embody your love in our daily lives. May what we learn today not remain mere knowledge, but become wisdom that transforms us. Help us carry these insights beyond this work, integrating them into our relationships, our choices, and our commitment to building your beloved community. We pray this in the name of the one who calls us to learn, to grow, and to love more fully. Amen. Some of you may not know me, so I'll introduce myself first before our distinguished speaker. My name is Leisha Shockley. My family and I have been members of Covenant for 25 plus years. Specifically, I had the honor of working on the second arts task force here at Covenant that was charged with looking at the myriad of folks that had an impact on our Christian walk, and then specifically, prayerfully recommending who would go into our stained glass windows. More importantly today, though, we're really pleased to welcome Reverend Dr. Melanie Jones Quarles, who joined us from Richmond, Virginia. She had quite a journey here yesterday, so we're going to show her a lot of love this morning. It was a hard route to get here. I'd like to share with you a little snippet of her remarkable bio. There's so much to learn about her, and just like we're learning about Dr. Cannon this morning, we're going to want to continue learning and tapping in to what Dr. Quarles is doing. So the Reverend Dr. Melanie Jones Quarles, PhD, is a womanist ethicist, millennial preacher, and intellectual activist. Melanie is assistant professor of ethics, theology, and culture, and the inaugural director of the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. The Reverend Dr. Quarles is a thinking woman of faith, embodying radical love and revolutionary justice in the academy, church, and global community. She earned her BA in Economics and Political Science from Howard University, a Master of Divinity with a certificate in Black Church Studies from Vanderbilt University's Divinity School, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Ethics, Theology and Culture with a concentration in Black faith and life at Chicago Theological Seminary. Dr. Quarles' research engages womanist theological ethics and sacred texts, millennials and faith, Black aesthetics, and digital technocultures, earning several notable fellowships and scholarships. The list is too long to list here. Her first academic monograph, Up Against a Crooked Gospel, Black Women's Bodies and the Politics of Redemption, is currently available via Orbis Books, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. Committed to enlivening a world where Black women and girls are whole and free, Dr. Quarles serves professional societies and international boards as a global leader. She was last year inducted into the Morehouse College Martin Luther King Jr. Collegium of Scholars for her distinguished achievements. Dr. Quarles is happily married to the Reverend Dr. DeQuan Quarles, Master of Divinity, who is currently solving their transportation problems. So, anyway, I hope that you will join me in this morning of learning and in welcoming our esteemed guest, Dr. Quarles.
Good morning. Can y'all hear me? Awesome. Thank you so much for that gracious invitation and introduction. What a privilege and an honor it is to join you for this summer Sunday school series here at Covenant. I'm elated to witness Reverend Doctor. I haven't seen it, but I look forward to seeing it after this. Is one of the newest faces. Dr. Cannon is one of the newest faces that has joined this esteemed, I think, cadre of trailblazers that are represented in your new stained glass windows. This is a timely honor as we culminate the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the ordination of Dr. Cannon as the first Black woman ordained in the Presbyterian Church. And so I am grateful to be here, but I also give honor to all of the leaders and conveners and moderators who have given this invitation, and all of you who have gathered this morning for such a conversation. I want to begin our discussion today on the life and legacy of Katie Geneva Cannon, and we'll start with this short video.
The essence of a life-led sermon is that the basic idea is born in our living, out of vivid memories of things said and done.
Being a front runner in a lot of this work, people want to dismiss the truth that I speak as anecdotal. Okay, if I don't have a scientific database where I can prove that what I've experienced is true for so many people, then it's not true. So the epistemological sea of forgetfulness is when people take truth that hurts, truth that goes to the core of the being, truth that goes to the marrow of the bone, and people want to say, if you can't prove it scientifically, factually, then it doesn't exist. So what I try to encourage people to do is that kind of truth that stings like a serpent's tooth, that kind of truth that makes your teeth itch, the kind of truth that causes some people to lose their minds up in here, up in here. So even when people call your truth a lie, tell it anyway. Tell it anyway.
This video gives us opportunity to actually hear Dr. Cannon's voice to speak about the truth that stings, the truth that she says that makes your teeth itch, the truth that pierces into the marrow of the bones. This is the truth that I think captures her work and her legacy. By wisdom, the Proverbs 24 says, a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge, the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. In her essay, Teaching Afrocentric Ethics, the hinges upon which the future swings, womanist ethicist Katie Geneva Cannon tells the story of her vocational becoming. This is young Katie. Nurtured by the leadership and humanitarian activism of Presbyterian minister James Herman Robinson, who was founder of Operation Crossroads Africa Incorporated, that is known to many as the predecessor of the Peace Corps. Cannon identified Robinson in the vanguard of progressive contemporary thinkers on Afrocentricity before it was fashionable. From one conversation over tea, Robinson drafted Cannon for her first of many travels to the motherland to visit communities in Ghana, Liberia, and Cote d'Ivoire, and to participate in a summer-long youth program which ultimately shaped her Afrocentric consciousness. The program was held during the summer of 1971, just after Cannon had earned her degree from the historically black college here in North Carolina, Barbara Scotia College, where she excelled academically, rising to the top of her class, and she was elected as Miss Barbara Scotia College. The key assignment of the summer program required that the work collective of 12 bright-eyed young adults, all of whom held no prior training in construction, to build a library in the town of Plebo near Cape Palmas, Liberia. Cannon and her comrades were enlisted to dig and pour a foundation. She describes this experience vividly. Quote, our assignment was to build a library. None of us had ever done construction work before. Nevertheless, for approximately 6 hours for 60 days, we adorned our pith helmets, brogans, and work gloves, shouldered pickaxes, shovels, and spades, and rode on the back of rickety, wobbly dump trucks, hauling sand from the ocean side to our work site in order to dig and pour a foundation. This common undertaking in any construction project is of utmost importance because the foundation is the portion of any structure that transfers the weight of the building to the ground. The foundation is the first part of the building, in some ways the hardest part, though the least accommodating and the least elegant. It establishes the basic footing for future construction. End quote. It is no surprise the first assignment Cannon receives just as she enters adulthood with college degree in tow was to build a repository of resources, a collection of writings and worlds, a home for the learned and the curious, a living institution that would nurture the imagination of future generations. This metaphor of building, constructing rather, and laying a foundation outlines Cannon's methodology from the beginning of her journey to the mentoring of numerous generations of religious leaders and scholars, and culminates in the founding of the Center for Womanist Leadership. For those of you who are familiar or new to the word womanism, womanism describes a growing methodological approach and prophetic social movement that takes the survival and liberation of Black women seriously while advocating for the wholeness and well-being of all humanity. Pulitzer Prize winning novelist Alice Walker put definition to the Southern Black colloquial term "you actin' womanish" in her classic 1983 collection of essays, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose. She named then the distinctive political aims of Black women beyond the white feminist scope, illustrated in the popular adage, "Womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender." Though Walker's definition is a point of departure for many, the womanist paradigm has taken shape since the 1980s in multiple academic disciplines, including literature, history, theater and film, communication and media, psychology, anthropology, social work, gender and sexuality, architecture and urban studies, Black studies, and most notably, religious studies. For more than 40 years, the womanist theological enterprise represents a collaborative discourse initiated by Black female theologians, ethicists, biblical scholars, historians, pastoral caregivers, religious leaders, and laity who take seriously the lived experiences of Black women in theory and praxis. While feminist theology rallied against patriarchy and the domineering forces threatening women's experiences, some feminists, even into the 1970s, maintained a privileged blindness that often ignored women's complex and contradicting identities, particularly along race and class. Black liberation theology, even in its initial emergence in the 1960s and 70s, even with a quest for liberation of an oppressed African American people, failed to address issues concerning gender. Bold and daring Black women, searching for a critically engaged academic dwelling place in the 1980s, rather than waiting on feminists or Black male liberationists to open the door of inclusion, utilized their sociocultural realities, theological proclivities, and mother wit to build a solid foundation for a home of their own. Thus, womanism is an audacious endeavor that engages Black women at its radically subjective center and involves all persons seeking justice. According to psychologist Layli Phillips Mapiron, in her 2006 The Womanist Reader, where she offers a broad analysis of womanist thought for the first 25 years, she suggests womanism includes 5 central aims. It is anti-oppressionist. That is, it rallies against all forms and manners of oppression and supports the liberation of all humanity. 2, it is vernacular. It is inclusive and accessible to the experiences of everyday folk and life. 3rd, it is non-ideological. It discourages rigidity and operates in a decentralized modality that maintains multi-dialogical engagement and self-evaluation that is not purely analytical, but holistic, effective, and spiritual. 4th, it is communitarian. concerned with the collective well-being as the goal of social change. And fifth, it is spiritualized. That is, it recognizes spiritual transcendence and the connection with material life. I articulate womanist thought in theological education or in religious studies by four primary motifs. First, it promotes the liberation and survival of Black women and the entire African American people while also advocating against all forms of oppression. This is when Alice Walker says it is committed to the survival and wholeness of entire people, male and female, not a separatist, except periodically for health's sake. Second, it encourages intergenerational bonds between girls and women in order to strengthen relationships and transfer survival tools. This is when Alice Walker says it is traditionally capable, as in, Mama, I'm walking to Canada and I'm taking you and a bunch of other slaves with me. And her reply would be, it wouldn't be the first time. Third, it maintains that God, Jesus, Spirit, the divine, identifies with the oppressed and the least of these in their quest for justice and wholeness. This is, it loves the Spirit, as Walker suggests. And fourth, it reclaims Black women's experiences, history, bodies, aesthetics, literature as primary sources for theological reflection and biblical interpretation. Cannon describes her womanist awakening through the memory of her grandmother and Katie's Cannon. She says, quote, "My grandmother, Rosa Cornelia White Little, was the gatekeeper in the land of counterpane. She was always available with salves, hot towels, and liniments to cure physical aches and spiritual ills. As a charismatic healer, Grandma Rosie's practice consisted of diagnosis, treatment, and prevention in the maintenance of overall wholeness. Many days my soul struggled with whether to go to school or to stay home and be healed from the injuries of the world inflicted unknowingly. In 1983, womanism became the new gatekeeper in my land of counterpane." Quickly adapting Walker's definition, it should be no surprise that Katie Geneva Cannon was the first within the Theological Academy to source the term womanist in her 1985 essay, The Emergence of a Black Feminist Consciousness. Here, Cannon provides a historical backdrop of Black women's experiences from the antebellum period through the civil rights movement to analyze the triple jeopardy of Black women's oppression in America that illustrates the interconnectedness and inseparability of racism, sexism, and classism in the lives of Black women. Cannon characterizes Black women's moral situation in the face of formidable oppression and under the threat of multiple death-dealing struggles as the struggle for human dignity, the struggle against white hypocrisy, the struggle for justice, and the struggle to survive in two contradictory worlds that simultaneously situates one white, privileged, and oppressive, and the other Black, exploited, and oppressed. The ongoing struggle for survival for Black women since the antebellum period illuminates this struggle for human dignity has been marked by Black women facing bodily attacks of objectification against their production, reproduction, and even sexual violation. It maintained that either Black people were human beings and not property, or either Black people were property in the antebellum period and sometimes deemed less than human. This struggle against white hypocrisy names ways that the rightness of whiteness counted more than the basic political and civil rights of any Black person. It situates the Black woman following slavery began her life of freedom with no vote, no protection, and no equity of any sort, Black women, young and old, were basically on their own. It characterizes this struggle for justice and the need to identify both black religion and the black church as sustaining forces to assure boundless justice. And last, in this struggle to survive, a black womanist consciousness as an interpretive approach provides black women with the critical space to chip away at oppressive structures bit by bit, while also employing the virtuous acts to search the scriptures or utilize the Bible as a source of authority, whereby Jesus provides the necessary soul for liberation. This is using the scriptures in order to learn how to dispel the threat of death in order to seize the present life. Canon widens the scope of sacred texts beyond the Bible to include the black women's literary tradition as valuable resources for constructive theological ethics as a living repository of the moral life of black women. Canon scholarship holds greater influence than simply introducing womanism to the theological academy. Her work, alongside these black women scholars like Jacqueline Grant and Dolores Williams, like first generation voices Renita J. Weems, Emily Towns, and Kelly Brown Douglas, to add folks like Clarice Martin and Cheryl Townsend Gilkes, and a great cloud of proto-womanist witnesses. All of these women blazed new methodological trails that constructed a black womanist tradition for an unrecognized population of black women in the academic guild. Today's womanist scholars identify these early formers of womanist approaches in theology, ethics, biblical studies, and sociology of religion as the builders and first generation trailblazers, of which canon is central. Reflecting on the formation of this womanist house of wisdom in theological studies, Cannon writes as a first generation womanist trailblazer. She says, quote, from 1985 until now, womanists have been most vocal despite intense opposition via white supremacy, male superiority, and class elitism concerning black women's substantive contributions as full-fledged members within theological discourse. While this is not an easy task, womanists contend that we must name and continue to name the particularities of God's presence in our everyday realities, because such clarity enhances our ability to tap the sacred foundation of our common humanity. Womanism for Cannon is rooted in liberation ethics, which she describes as debunking, unmasking, and disentangling the ideologies, theologies, and systems of value operative in a particular society. The critical task of womanism is to debunk the lies designed to ensure that black women were never meant to survive, to unmask the truth by asking the hard questions of power relations that enforce damaging values, and to disentangle the exasperating problems facing marginalized peoples and communities. Womanism further requires a constructive agenda to move from death to life by mining the mother lode of cultural traditions and real lived textures that black women use to resist and rebel against oppressive situations through justice-making resources. Drawing from Zora Neale Hurston's notion of hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick that illustrates black people defying all odds, Cannon describes her subversive standpoint as scholar and activist. She says, quote, the dilemma of the black woman emphasis as the non-canonical other is defined as working in opposition to the academic establishment, yet building upon it. The liberation ethicist works both within and outside the guild. Cannon understood both the critical and constructive aims of womanism as necessary to build a black womanist home of our own. Many of you may know that Katie Geneva Cannon was born in 1950 as one of 7 children to Corinne Little and Esau Cannon in Fishertown of Kannapolis, North Carolina. Cannon understood that the only way to escape working at the factory mill was to become a teacher. So she pursued and earned a bachelor's degree, as I said earlier, at a small HBCU, Barbara Scotia College in Concord, North Carolina. She went on to pursue a Master of Divinity at Johnson C. Smith Theological Seminary at the Interdenominational Theological Center, known as ITC, in Atlanta, Georgia. She admits that within her North Carolina bubble, she only believed there were black Presbyterians, because North Carolina then and now maintains the largest constituency of black Presbyterians. Cannon understood her call to be a theological educator early and was ordained as a minister of word and sacrament in 1974 by her United Presbyterian Carolina Presbytery, earning her, she didn't know then, but we know now, her status as the first black woman ordained in the Presbyterian Church. When she arrived at seminary, Dr. Cannon often described the scathing sexism and menacing misogynoir of her black male colleagues who did not believe women were called to ministry. But to their dismay, she was already ordained. She entered Union Theological Seminary of New York in the 1970s, not as a student of ethics, but as a graduate student desiring to pursue scholarly training in biblical studies. She was met with a hostile old boys club of white male scholars who drove her out of the department. They identified her as an unserious student because she pastored a small church in Harlem, New York, while pursuing doctoral studies, and denied her the opportunity to advance and excel in the biblical guild. The challenge of trailblazers is that they often face and encounter the rocky and difficult terrain of every incline to a new dimension. But there was a glimpse of promise even in this rough patch. The Reverend Dr. Beverly Harrison, known to many of us as the mother of feminist ethics and a Presbyterian member, and the Reverend Dr. James Howe Cone, who is also known as the father of Black liberation theology. Both of them recognized Katie's gifts and accepted her into the ethics department, and the rest is history, or her story. As Dr. Cannon went on to revolutionize an entire field. Renita J. Weems describes it this way in Walking Through the Valley: the biblical field's loss was womanist ethics gain. Cannon became the first, again, African American to earn the Doctor of Philosophy degree from Union Theological Seminary of New York City in 1983. A scholar among scholars, Dr. Cannon served the faculty at Temple University, Episcopal Divinity School, Davidson College, Williams College, and Harvard Divinity School before she joined the faculty at Union Presbyterian School as the Annie Scales Rogers Professor in Richmond, Virginia from 2001 to her passing in 2018. She lectured globally and locally to diverse audience on a range of topics, including African American social ethics, womanism, pedagogy, and preaching. An accomplished author, she published several notable works: Black Womanist Ethics, Katie's Canon, Womanism and the Soul of Black Community, Teaching, Preaching, Isaac Rufus Clarke, and Black sacred rhetoric, and a host of anthologies, articles, and works. A global leader, Dr. Cannon was elected as the president of the Society for the Study of Black Religion, and she was a founding convener of the Daughters of the African Atlantic Fund. A decorated teacher, she received the 2006 Distinguished Professor Award from Spelman College, the 2011 Excellence in Teaching Award from the American Academy of Religion, the 2015 Union Medal, which is the highest award of distinction presented by Union Theological Seminary in New York, the 2018 Beautiful Are the Feet from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, and at the 223rd General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, Dr. Cannon was bestowed the Excellence in Theological Education Award, reserved for those who have made a significant impact on theological education. She says, quote, "Teaching is my ministry. I love teaching to empower, to equip, and to set people free." A guiding spirit. No one could imagine, not even Cannon, that her 33-year-old dream of a womanist center spawned by a conversation in a room in New York City with Dolores Williams and Alice Walker in the 1990s would manifest in full glory just 4 months before her untimely passing, as relates to, or she was diagnosed with, acute leukemia on August 9, 2018. While there were local projects and pilot iterations of the center through gatherings and luncheons named Squaring the Womanist Circle to translate Black women's religious scholarship, artisanship, and activism into community service in 2013 and 15 and 17, Cannon founded and organized the Center for Womanist Leadership in 2018 as her last living testament. This is a doodle of her creative drawings, but you may utilize this QR code if you want to learn more specifically about the center. Union Presbyterian Seminary's immediate past president, Brian Blunt, describes the moment Cannon's organizing wheels began turning like a visionary prophet to shift her dream of a center into a reality. He says, quote, "Several years ago, the Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon and I sat in my office and dreamed a dream. Her vision of a center that will focus on work that was a vital part of her academic mission and now legacy bloomed before us. She spoke passionately about her hope to connect her scholarly work to the communal initiatives of improving the circumstances for women of color in Richmond, Virginia, and beyond. Her hands gesturing with conviction, she explained how the idea of a center for womanist leadership might begin. A programmatic initiative was a great way to start, she called it, squaring the womanist circle, and she was certain that this was not a program that Union Presbyterian Seminary could pull off on its own. Right from the start, she began thinking of scholars and scholarship at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. Then she envisioned an even broader alliance. She called to mind womanist scholars from around the U.S. and the world who would be wonderful conversation partners. And she began to build right there in front of my eyes. The academic, ecclesial, and community response to Professor Cannon's vision was affirmation and celebration, and it was immediate. So immediately we set to work putting the full focus of her passion and the full support of the UPSEM administration into motion, end quote. Laying the foundation of an institution was a job that Cannon knew she could not do alone. In true womanist fashion, Cannon galvanized and recruited a center design team of womanist scholars, current and former students, community leaders, and pastors in collaboration to connect head, heart, and hands to the womanist vision in its nascent stages. The center design team worked night and day collaboratively with Cannon at proverbial realms of a construction site, pulling together tools and commissioning resources in order to concretize her vision. The Center for Womanist Leadership opened by celebrating her street in April 2018 as it launched officially then on the 44th anniversary of Cannon's ordination, while bearing witness to womanism, what was, what is, and what shall be. According to feminist theologian Mary Hunt, from the opening address by world-renowned author Alice Walker to the closing ritual when participants rendered homage to the elders and received their blessing, the gathering marked a signal contribution to women's work in religion. Following her passing, the Board of Trustees of Union Presbyterian Seminary named the center in her honor in 2019 and endowed the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership in 2020. Cannon tilled the soil and laid the foundation for what was sure to be a towering institutional home for womanist leaders and collaborators for many generations to come. This is indeed womanist wisdom. She says, when I first began at New York Theological Seminary in 1977, there were no books by Black women theologians. In her early teaching, Cannon used novels, then added nonfiction and biographies and essays to discern Black women's God talk until the catalog grew wider, filled with numerous works across disciplines that broadened the womanist canon. She continues, quote, however, the primary materials now being published by Black women in the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature allow me to ask and began to answer new questions about the ideologies, theologies, and systems of value of African American people. This pivotal shift occurring as more women of all races and creeds and colors earn doctorates from theological seminaries and departments of religion in universities. Today, the Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership recognizes the significance of centering Black women's scholarship and wisdom as viable sources and resources for theological education and the global community. As a site of participatory learning for students and scholars, clergy, laity, activists, artists, entrepreneurs, allies, and community leaders, the center seeks to institutionalize womanist wisdom by building Black women's historical archives through the cultivation and preservation of Black women's oral, visual, and written stories and intellectual contributions. The center encourages and develops womanist writers and writings for the purpose of organizing and producing a tangible collection of womanist thought for the perpetuity and proliferation of the womanist idea for practitioners and academics, or otherwise known as what Cannon describes the town and the gown. Through womanist publications and resources for public access, the center builds an arsenal of translatable and transferable practices, pedagogies, and processes for thinkers and practitioners across the globe. Like Cannon in 1977, I too enter classrooms of seminary students in 2025 who have never read a book by an African-descended woman and have never even encountered a Black woman preaching in their churches or teaching in their schools. Hence, the necessary reason for religious scholars and practitioners to continue to mine the motherlode of Black women's writings in a quest to debunk, unmask, and disentangle oppressive ideologies, theologies, and systems and move from death to life. Like securing a strong foundation, the framing process of building requires a second act that is detailed and careful precision as new rooms and doorways, windows are mapped, and the design layout is implemented. As the director of the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership, our mission is to nurture the soul work of Black women as we cultivate pathways to whole communities and to become our vision, the premier global center for womanist theory and practice. Our story is groundbreaking. We are endowed at the center as a center of Union Presbyterian Seminary, highlighting the experiences of one of the fastest growing populations in theological education, which is Black women. We are a leading center across ATS theological schools and the only named after a trailblazing Black woman scholar, the Katie Geneva Cannon, that centers womanist approaches. We gather Black women across 9 geographical regions throughout the U.S. and the Global South, and we've received grants and partnerships from the Black Church Cornerstone Collaborative, the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Henry Luce Foundation, the Lilly Foundation, the Presbyterian Mission Agency, and the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning. I envision our work at Union Presbyterian as an institutionalizing agent. This was our last conference just this past May in Charleston, South Carolina, that carries Cannon legacies forward for today's living and future generations through 6 high priority initiatives. Womanist Wellness, which is aimed for healing and retreat programming. Womanist Witness, which is designed for community engagement and forming the next generation of leaders. Womanist Worship, which is our connectional programming with faith communities. Womanist Wisdom, which is our academic publishing, archiving, and cataloging. Womanist Wares, which is our social entrepreneurship initiative toward sustainable community. And Womanist Works, which is our integrating and interrogating the arts. To purchase our wares, you may visit thewomanistmarketplace.com in order to support the center in that way. I have pondered long and hard about Cannon's naming of the center under the contextual framework of womanist leadership, which encompasses womanism's intellectual, spiritual, ethical, and activist dimensions. The stories of Black women's leadership are often missing or ignored in leadership studies, and the narratives of the leadership legacies and models that are passed down or carried from one generation to the next. This center is rooted in the coming together of Black women against the isolating experiences of oppression as an unapologetic commitment to the wholeness, liberation, justice, and self-sustainability of marginalized communities, and an unwavering impetus to stay in tune with the spirit and the folk. As a consummate moral leader, Cannon lived into what Robert Franklin names as the art of centering down, stepping forward, and dreaming up. This is what inspired and influenced countless to join her organizing endeavors. Embodying unctuousness at every stage of her vocational journey, Katie Geneva Cannon embodied Black womanist leadership before such a concept was intelligible. Process theologian Monica Coleman, in her 2006 article, Must I Be a Womanist?, wonders about the distinctions between Black feminism and womanism and doubts whether she can find a home in womanist religious thought because of often its heteronormativity and Christian hegemony. Walker's definition makes Coleman feel at home, but Coleman's bemoans that womanist religious scholarship in its first 20 years left me in a house without enough furniture. There are not enough chairs, couches, or beds for me or many of the Black women I know and love. It isn't a place where we can be who we are and some of the most important ways we live sexually, spiritually, or politically, end quote. Cannon acknowledges Coleman's claims as valid and valuable for pushing the womanist project forward. But Cannon resists Coleman's interest to toss away the term womanist and evict this house of wisdom. As a master builder, Cannon responds and offers Coleman and future generations this charge. We officially, she says, quote, began constructing this womanist house of wisdom in 1985. And as intellectual laborers, we continue to work day in and day out so that our scholarly infrastructure is built on a solid rock instead of shifting sand. Let us celebrate this analogous reality by acknowledging that the second generation of womanist scholars has completed the structure of this womanist house of wisdom. And now it is time for Coleman's contemporaries, whom she identifies as the third wave, to furnish the interior to provide supportive objects that indicate a readiness for occupancy. Cannon makes clear in this house there is room for all of us, including Black women of diverse sexualities, backgrounds, social locations, religious identity, and the goal of construction is to build a platform for a multiplicity of voices and perspectives so that they may add their unique contributions. Cannon says, by asking heretofore undreamed and unfamiliar questions of every aspect of the theological traditions to which we are heirs, womanist, feminist, and mujerista scholars play a significant role in authorizing God talk. By wisdom, as the proverb says, a house is built. And by understanding, it is established. By knowledge, the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 3 goes on, according to the grace of God given to me, I am a skilled master builder. I laid a foundation and someone else is building on it. Each builder must choose with care how to build upon it. As a millennial womanist, who belongs to a generational cohort that is often highly suspicious of the value of institutions for Black women in a contemporary era because of the gaping historical wounds at the hands of multidimensional oppressions inflicted by theological schools, churches, and religious traditions, I often return to the basic building blocks of Cannon's methodology to debunk, unmask, and disentangle as counter-hegemonic strategies for imagining womanist futures. As Cannon recognized her students as the hinges upon which the 21st century swings, I argue the future is womanist because the transformative possibilities for the academy and the church and the world hinge on Black women. Likewise, the center is an institutional force equipped to guide Black women to wholeness as we transform communities. No one can deny that Katie Geneva Cannon did the work of empowering, equipping, and setting people free. Cannon articulated a liberationist methodology and embodied a womanist consciousness that will be useful in print for theoethical formation of religious thinkers and scholars beyond her lifespan, and in practice for the cultivation of justice seekers and moral agents who will further her legacy. Cannon did the work her soul must have. She understood her assignment to lay the foundation and ground her work for future generations. Her clarion call to all of us is to build upon it. There is no question that Dr. Cannon's legacy lives on, like the Reverend Cecilia Armstrong and countless others around the nation who exist as foregrounding leaders, Black women Presbyterian leaders. But there is still work to do 50 years after Cannon's ordination, when there is still only one just recently Black woman full-time pastor in North Carolina, in the central vicinity of the largest constituency of Black Presbyterians, and still even more, only a few across the nation. Still work to do when women who break the stained glass ceilings are placed in pastoral leadership roles where they encounter more glass cliffs, inheriting failing churches or congregations in significant crisis and duress with a need to clean up the dirty laundry to save the institution. Still work to do when wage and pay gaps still exist where women in our church earn significantly less than their male counterparts, which is even more stratified for women of color. Cannon is calling all of us to do the work our soul must have, to empower, to equip, and to set people free. This is why Renita Weems says some women deserve double honor. While Katie Geneva Cannon needs no introduction, if we put some respect on her name. She is the Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon, first of her name, a thinking woman of faith, a black woman with a beautiful mind, a scholar among scholars, a womanist trailblazer whose influence will be known as one of the most prolific religious voices of our time, a wise woman whose relevance will endure throughout every age and in every time. A reverend, doctor, sister, friend in every sense of the word. Though the slate of womanist scholars is ever growing, Dr. Cannon stands at the height of the womanist scholar tradition as a first-rate professor, preacher, priest, prophet, and Presbyterian. Her works and writings rise to the top of the widening catalog of womanist theological scholarship and black women's sacred literature. If womanist wisdom were in flesh, there is no doubt that the Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon would be her name. Thank you. We have a few minutes of questions.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. We have just a few minutes, and we'd love to use those few minutes for any questions that you might have. At the end of the pews, there are note cards. If any of you have questions, if you take just a moment to write them out, Mal will pick them up for us, or I'll pick them up, and we'll let Dr. Quarles attempt to answer them for us. So, give you just a minute.
Full-time, full-time senior pastor. Yes, yes. It's only one. But in senior full-time pastor. Only one in North Carolina. And I think she just got installed earlier this year. So before that, there were none full-time senior pastor, black women pastors.
We had one other question. What was your own experiential understanding or encounters with womanist theology before you had that name to encapsulate it?
Yeah. I often say that my womanish upbringing, I grew up on the Windy City of Chicago, and started when I was very young because I think I was acting womanish way before my time. Because my mother's backhand scolding that I was talking too much and too soon gives some indication. But I think the formation of my own kind of womanish journey happened. As was read earlier, attended Howard University in Washington, D.C., which is another HBCU. And there I took a few courses. I was actually economics and political science major. Took a few courses in the divinity school, but I started to get some orientation, especially with black women's literature, to the terminology of Alice Walker and Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston, of womanism that emerged. And then by the time I landed at Vanderbilt for my master's, was where that was really cultivated. And I met actually a student of Dr. Cannon, one of her first doctoral students who ended up becoming my professor, Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas. So in many ways, I think that I'm a part of this kind of grandmother legacy that Cannon's student taught me, became my mentor. And so it's homage to pay this back. Dr. Cannon and I were both on the board of the Daughters of the African Atlantic Fund when I was a graduate student. And my initial, of course, I had become acquainted with Dr. Cannon through her work and through her writings and so forth. But if you ever met her in person, she was absolutely hilarious. I mean, filled with so many jokes, and just able to really captivate a room. And so that's where we met in terms of doing our work. No one would imagine, that she would be launching the center in April. June, she would be diagnosed with leukemia, acute leukemia, and in August, she would be passing. So that would have been imagined in terms of that. the seminary did a year-long search right when I was kind of ending or running up to finish my graduate program, and I came on a year later, July of 2019. So I've been at the seminary for about 6 years now. So that's a whirlwind of stories. She wouldn't have imagined that I would be here, and I wouldn't have imagined that I would be here. But the only reason that I came to Union was because of this center.
Any other questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate your talk and your insight. So you talked about the debunking the lies and things like that, and unfortunately, we're in an era where those are resurfacing, and there's a lot of on social media especially. And I read recently that for Gen Z, a lot of especially the younger, like the younger 10 years of Gen Z are really getting a lot of those lies essentially on TikTok. So I'm wondering if your group is looking into social media as a way to help to debunk those lies and to kind of counteract some of those things that they're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Cannon would be talking about debunking, unmasking, and disentangling, and especially in a time, this kind of post-truth era, that requires that we do the difficult work to find the truth. And often, this is not, it is hidden, right? It is often concealed because we don't want to confront that which is true, right? And so this is the kind of deep archival digging work that Cannon invites us to, much as she did at the top of her vocation. I think, yes, social media is a prime kind of way by which there are lies exposed that are, again, shared, but also if we look at social media as a way to counter, right, some of these lies that have been told. So I'm thinking of this in the context of, especially when we've seen instances of police brutality, part of it is not the record that was given in terms of the police report, but often the videos, right, that countered, right, the narrative, right? And this becomes a way by which we have activism that is so readily available to us at the kind of click of our phone that makes it possible for us to bring truth, especially when we know that there will be lies or narratives that will be respun based upon the acts that have happened. So in this sense, I think part of our work is encouraging folks to find ways of using that which is most available to them. And if social media is a pathway, then it becomes a useful tool. It is a tool because it is also, we know, a tool of surveillance. So just because it's a post or something you respond to does not mean that you will be outside of the logics that often want to invade your privacy in other ways, or that may make you a target, right, in response to some of that which you. So we have to see it as a tool and not the source, because in this sense, there are both upsides and downsides as it relates to the use of these tools that we have available.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes.
I was just curious, what are you most excited about, I guess, coming up with your work and what you are doing?
Yeah, well, most excited. I'm July 1st, I go on sabbatical for a year, so I'm literally one day from that, June 30th. So that's the most excitement. But part of what folks will be doing during my sabbatical, we have an acting director, Dr. Lakeisha Lockhart, who is coming on as acting director, and they'll be doing an assessment process of what we've done the last 6 years and give recommendations, kind of an internal quality audit of what we've done and what we could recommend for the seminary to do as we move forward. So this is really a transformational year for us, where I get to work on my next book project, which is actually on Dr. Cannon. I'm working on a sermons book from her work, and that'll later turn into a second book, probably that will be her fuller biography. But I'm excited to see that the center is able to say, we've done these things, that we fulfill part of what Cannon envisioned. And now that we have this foundation, what are some ways in which we'll build upon it in this next cycle, for sure? Yeah.
Well, we would like to thank you so much for being here. I'd love for you all to join me in thanking Dr. Quarles for being here this morning. We won't look at the windows the same way.
Yes.
That is for certain. Before we close today, I want to remind you all that next Sunday, July 6th, there will be no Sunday school, as it's the July 4th weekend. But following that, the following week, we'll resume this series with looking at more pathways of discipleship. Right now, we've extended a little bit and worship is about to start, but before we close our time together, let's go to God in prayer. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this sacred time of learning and reflection. May the stories we've heard, the truths we've uncovered, and the voices we've honored today stay with us, shaping how we live, how we love, and how we labor. Empower us to carry this learning into the world, not only to speak words of justice, but to embody them. Go with us now as we leave this space, and may the legacy of Dr. Cannon continue to stir our spirits, guide our steps, and call us ever closer to the liberating love of Christ. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you for this morning.